to 7 on Wood TV with Brittany Flowers and meteorologist Blake Harms.
A big day in the courtroom as the defense calls former Grand Rapids police officer Christopher Schurr to the stand to testify in his own murder trial. Supporters welcoming Schurr as he walked into the courtroom this morning. He testified for more than 3 hours, answering questions about his background and training, then speaking on the traffic stop and struggle with Patrick Lyoya. Schurr told the jury he was afraid he'd die that day. His defense team trying to give the jury insight into what he was thinking and feeling when he pulled out his gun and shot Patrick Lyoya in the back of the head on April 4th of 2022. During cross-examination, Schurr said that under policy, he was justified to move up to other levels of force based on aggression from Lyoya.
In my mind, I've tried knee strikes and they were completely ineffective. I didn't feel as though they were, they were having any type of effect, or even it didn't seem as though he was acknowledging the fact that I was striking him. So to me, what made the most sense with my level of exhaustion and just the lack of effect with those strikes, I felt as though I needed to move to a taser just to actually interrupt the muscle function.
Schurr testified he felt he'd exhausted all options. As part of the defense's argument, this was self-defense. Prosecutor Chris Becker does not believe Schurr was justified in the shooting. Under cross-examination, Schurr said Lyoya never pointed the taser at him and he was trying to get away. The judge also read questions from the jury questioning why Schurr shot Lyoya in the head. He claimed he wasn't aiming at his head. 2 more defense witnesses took the stand after Schurr. Dr. David Blake spoke about auditory exclusion, a form of temporary hearing loss that can happen in high-stress situations. He's an expert in human factors psychology and police practices and spent 14 years in law enforcement. Louis Kleem was the last to testify today. He was called in as an expert in police practices, policies, tactics, and use of force. Kleem says he doesn't agree with the experts brought forth by the prosecution this week, and that there's no generally accepted police practices you can hold an officer to. When it comes to reasonable force, he says 4 things are key: intent, ability, means, and opportunity.
Is it reasonable for an officer to believe that someone who has struggled that hard to take your weapon has the intent to use it when they've taken the time to transition it to what is typically a dominant hand, and to hold it in a manner that's consistent with its use and also does not throw it away? So based on that and his earlier failure or his refusal to obey lawful commands, the aggressiveness with which he resisted the arrest, those things to me would fall, a similar situated officer in those conditions, not only would it be reasonable to believe that, as a trainer, we would actually train them to believe that, and I think that was consistent with the training we heard Officer Schurr received.
Kleem says although this is a tragic case, he's asked hundreds of officers what they are trained to do if someone takes their taser, and nearly everyone answered escalate to deadly force. Testimonies wrapped up around 4:45. Kleem's cross-examination will continue Monday morning. And back in studio tonight is Professor Tracy Brame, Associate Dean of Experiential Learning and Practice Preparation at Cooley Law School. Thank you so much again for being here with us tonight.
Good evening. Glad to be here.
So the million-dollar question was whether Schurr would take the stand. He did that today. Can you talk about what were some of the takeaways from hearing his own testimony?
Absolutely. So it's always a risk for the defense to call the defendant to the stand because you never know how they're going to be taken by the jury, et cetera. But in a self-defense case like this, it's really important for the jury to hear from the defendant himself about what he was thinking, what he was feeling in the moment, as they try to assess whether his actions were justified. And so Officer Schurr today tried to convey that, how exhausted he was, how combative Mr. Lyoya was, how he felt as though he had no option but to do what he did. In fact, you know, as it was mentioned before, he felt as though he wasn't going to go home that day if he did not escalate to deadly force. And so he acquitted himself relatively well, certainly on direct examination, but even on cross-examination as he was challenged by the prosecution, who seemed to concentrate on the fact that in his statement closer to the incident, he seemed to acknowledge that Mr. Lyoya was trying to get away as opposed to being assaultive. And so we'll see how the jury, you know, takes his testimony and how they consider that. But
what did you think about his demeanor on the stand?
Again, he seemed composed. Again, it's always tough to know how his demeanor is going to go over with the jury, whether they think he's going to be too calm or whether they think he should be more emotive, et cetera, because people read often incorrectly, right, into people's body language. But again, I thought that he was very composed. He answered the questions that were asked of him, and importantly, he didn't get rattled on cross-examination. He seemed to earnestly be trying to explain right where he was coming from on the day of the incident.
What have you noticed about the jury, and specifically, I mean, they had some questions too.
So the jury, I think, has been asking great questions. This is a tough case. They seem to get more comfortable as the days go on and asking questions, and the judge is doing a great job in facilitating that. So they had several questions for Officer Schurr, ranging from could he smell alcohol on Leola, which he couldn't, explaining the stop and the improper plates, and then importantly, just point blank, why did you shoot him in the head, right? And Officer Schurr, again, calmly explained that he didn't aim to do that, but that's the area, right, of his body that was, that was exposed as he was struggling with him. And again, whether that's reasonable or not, we'll see with the jury verdict, but they asked great questions. They seem to be grappling with this, really paying attention, really trying to figure it out. How did this traffic stop turn into such a tragedy? And trying to digest the information that's being given to them from the experts. So I think they're asking good questions.
Yeah, I think it's been over 30 hours of testimony, so it's good to see that they are still engaged. And I think it was obviously huge hearing from Schurr himself today. I want to talk quickly about the last couple of experts that came up. What did they offer today?
So again, they're trying to give, so there's a subjective piece to what Officer Schurr was thinking and feeling, which he gave in his testimony. But then the question is, was that reasonable, right? Or was Schurr just saying whatever he needed to say, right, to get off? And so the defense experts this afternoon tried to give some context to whether his actions were reasonable. Okay, maybe you believe that Officer Schurr was afraid in the moment or was struggling or was tired, but would a reasonable officer respond the way that he did? And those experts, of course, both said yes, and importantly contrasted the prosecution's experts who testified that they did not think it was reasonable. Now, part of this is a battle of the experts and a battle of policy preferences, right? Like, how do you feel that police officers should interact with suspects when they stop them? But in this case in particular, it's about, do we take Officer Schurr at his word for what he was feeling, or do we also consider what a reasonable, or how do we consider what a reasonable person would do? So like that final witness said, there's no magical reasonable officer. We have to think about the human factors that Officer Schurr was faced with. So it's interesting.
All things I think the jury will have to consider. We don't know the complete exact timeline of when everything will happen, but we know testimony will continue Monday morning. And then after that, likely instructions to the jury for deliberation, and then, or we'll hear closing arguments.
Closing arguments, which would be, so I'll be interested to see how the attorneys tie everything together, all the testimony together in closing argument.
Yeah, all right. Tracy Brame with Cooley Law School, thank you so much for being here with us all week. And you can stay with News 8 for continuing coverage of the Schurr trial from start to finish. When the trial begins again next week, we'll monitor all the latest developments both on air and in real time at woodtv.com.